Indigenous access issues in physiotherapy.
The Canadian Physiotherapy Association currently has goals for 2018 to 2020 outlined by the Indigenous Health Subcommittee in order to improve health and reduce inequities of Indigenous peoples. The goals outlined on their website are as follows: to nurture engagement and connection among Indigenous physiotherapists in order to work toward Indigenous leadership in Canada. The second goal is to support non-Indigenous physiotherapists to reduce the inequities between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous. This is accomplished through building capacity in providing culturally safe, humble, and responsive healthcare, and in their complicity in the systems of inequality, primarily settler colonialism and racism. The final goal they describe is celebrating and showcasing examples of Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaborations.
Now let's address 3 specific questions to see if we are meeting these goals. The first is, do Indigenous people have equal access to healthcare? Well, Indigenous people are still burdened with geographical barriers to health services. This is in part due to living in more rural areas on reserves where specialized health services are scarce. The second question is, are Indigenous people being treated properly? In Canada, there is currently a lack of healthcare professionals that are able to provide culturally competent and safe healthcare. This could be due in part to the lack of representation of Indigenous people within the physiotherapy profession. Canada has yet to introduce consistent strategies to target these shortcomings. The last question is, what kind of biases or thoughts currently exist regarding Indigenous people in healthcare? Healthcare providers often attribute poor patient attendance to lack of buy-in and/or cultural differences instead of looking at the social determinants of health as a whole. There's also current lack of education on and use of cultural sensitivity in physiotherapy practice. And as such, healthcare providers often use their preconceived notions of who Indigenous people are and make assumptions instead of trying to learn and understand who Aboriginal people are and how they differ from ourselves. Now the question becomes, how can we ensure Indigenous people receive best practice care? This will involve increasing cultural sensitivity within the PT practice, which can be done when possible by promoting placements in Indigenous communities and implementing required courses on Indigenous health into the master's program.
This will be discussed in more detail later, but ultimately, these actions will lead to better patient-centered care.